Ce qu'il nous reste à faire, c'est faire la révolution.
What we have to do now is to make revolution.
Recently, a small discrepancy has appeared inside a government export ledger in Burkina Faso. It wasn't flagged, it wasn't explained. It was quietly marked pending. On paper, the country had shipped a certain amount of gold. But in the international trade records, buyers had received far more. No press release followed, no investigation was announced. The numbers were simply left to sit in a locked file. Around the same time, a sentence began circulating across Africa. "We are here to finish what Thomas Sankara started." Most people heard emotion, but a few heard danger, because you don't finish something unless it was interrupted. And Sankara's project was not stopped by speeches or elections. It was stopped by a system that still moves money, resources, and decisions out of African hands. So the question isn't whether the past is returning. The real question is, what exactly was never allowed to end? Let's find out. The thing that was never allowed to end was not a government. It was a redirection. When Thomas Sankara came to power, he discovered something that didn't appear in speeches, constitutions, or aid agreements. It was hidden in trade schedules, loan clauses, pricing formulas, and shipping routes. Burkina Faso exported cotton, gold, livestock, and raw materials, yet none of those exports created stability inside the country. Every year, the numbers said growth, but the streets said nothing changed. So Sankara didn't start with corruption or elections. He started with movement. Where resources went, where prices were decided, where money settled, who signed the final papers. He realized that Burkina Faso did not control the last step of its own economy. The sale might start in Ouagadougou, but the value ended somewhere else. By the time profits came back, they were smaller, slower, and wrapped in debt. The country was working hard, but the destination of its labor was not itself. That was the interruption point. So Sankara tried to move the destination. He pushed domestic processing instead of raw export. He challenged the idea that Africa must sell cheaply and buy back expensively. He cut luxury imports for officials because they were part of the leak, a signal that wealth would leave again the moment it arrived. He rejected loan conditions that required Burkina Faso to open its markets without building its own industries first. Every one of these moves had one effect. They changed where value was supposed to stop. And that change did not go unnoticed. Contracts stalled, access to credit tightened, trade partnerships grew difficult. Sankara was not isolated because of ideology. He was isolated because his policies interfered with routes that had been stable for decades. Routes that connected West African resources to global markets through systems that no African state fully controlled. When he was removed, there was no dramatic reversal announcement. No law saying, "We are reopening the pipelines." Instead, the redirection simply ended. Export corridors reopened. Currency dependence resumed. Aid replaced production again. The destination quietly shifted back outside. What made this powerful was how invisible it looked. On the surface, Burkina Faso returned to normal governance. Budgets flowed, ministries functioned, elections continued, but underneath, the direction of wealth was the same as before: outward first, inward later, and never in equal measure. This is why people say Sankara's revolution was killed. It wasn't. It was paused. Because nothing was destroyed. The systems remained. They were only placed back into their original position. And once they were stable again, the evidence of interruption slowly disappeared from public memory. But the roots remained, which means the unfinished work is not symbolic. It is logistical. It lives in transport chains, pricing rules, banking settlements, and contract structures that still decide where African value ends its journey. And if those roots were restored once before, the real question becomes, where do they actually lead now? They lead to places most Africans will never see, not because they are secret, but because they were never meant to be questioned. When Sankara was removed, the old corridors didn't just reopen, they were modernized. What once required colonial administrators now runs through pricing indexes, commodity exchanges, correspondent banks, and global clearing systems. The destination changed from visible empires to invisible networks. Today, a ton of gold can leave West Africa, be insured in one country, priced in another, refined in a third, and finally sold in a fourth before a single dollar touches the soil where it was mined. By the time the money returns, it has passed through so many layers of fees, currency conversions, interest schedules, and risk premiums that the original country receives only a shadow of its own value. This is not inefficiency, it is routing. The same pattern exists for cotton, oil, lithium, cocoa, timber, and even data. Africa exports raw inputs at the lowest point in the value chain and re-imports finished products at the highest. The trade ledger grows, but the balance sheet never closes. Governments celebrate export records while borrowing to fund basic services. The numbers move, but stability does not. This is why the gold file in the intro matters. It is not an anomaly, it is a symptom. It shows that the final stop for African wealth is no longer within African borders. The economy works like a one-way street. Resources go out, obligations come back. And once the roots are built this way, they begin to defend themselves. Every trade contract is governed by foreign law. Every payment is settled through foreign banks. Every price is indexed to foreign exchanges. So even when African states own the resource, they do not own the terms of its movement. This is why leaders often look powerful domestically, but helpless financially. They govern territory, but not transaction logic. The map says sovereign. The system says dependent. And this is where the trap closes. Because when a country's revenue must pass through external gates, any attempt to redirect those gates triggers resistance. Not with tanks, but with legal pressure, credit downgrades, capital flight, and risk assessments that suddenly turn negative. It looks like economics. It behaves like discipline. So when Traore talks about finishing what Sankara started, he is not promising prosperity. He is threatening rerouting. He is pointing at a structure that decides where Africa's value is allowed to end and saying that endpoint must move back home. But roots that carry billions do not protect themselves. Someone always stands at the junction. Which brings us to the next question. Who is positioned to guard these corridors from the inside? They do not wear uniforms. They do not run for office. They do not appear in speeches. But they are always there when decisions are signed. When a mining contract is approved, a local consultant reviews it. When a loan is issued, a domestic guarantor validates it. When a reform is proposed, a technical committee delays it. This group does not own the roots, but they control access to them. They are lawyers, fixers, procurement officers, compliance experts, middle managers, project coordinators, and political intermediaries. They survive every regime because their loyalty is not to leaders, it is to the structure that feeds them. They speak the language of process. They defend international standards. They warn of investor confidence. But what they protect is not stability. They protect continuity. Their power is not visible, but it is precise. A delayed signature can freeze a billion-dollar project. A missing document can stall a reform for years. A misfiled report can erase evidence. They do not say no, they say later, until later becomes never. This is why nothing changes even when governments fall. Presidents come and go, parliaments dissolve, flags change, yet the roots stay open. Because this layer absorbs shocks. It translates foreign requirements into local obstacles. It protects the pipeline by making it appear untouchable, complex, and too risky to change. When Sankara tried to bypass this class, he didn't confront them publicly. He stripped them of privilege. He cut the incentives that kept them loyal to the old routes. He forced transparency into ministries that had thrived in shadows. That is why he was isolated. Because when you threaten the middle layer, you threaten the shock absorbers of the system. After his removal, this class quietly returned to its original role. They didn't need to seize power. They simply resumed control of paperwork, approvals, audits, and compliance. They didn't overthrow the revolution. They waited it out. This is why Traore's words are unsettling to them. Because if finishing what Sankara started becomes policy, it means contracts will be reopened, revenue will be digitized, middlemen will be removed, and delays will be exposed. It means the invisible layer becomes visible, And when visibility arrives, protection disappears. But there is one problem. This layer is deeply rooted. It trains itself. It promotes itself. It moves across governments and borders. It is not one network, it is the connective tissue of the system. So removing it requires more than authority. It requires public awareness, which is why the youth are beginning to notice the pattern and reject it. So the next question becomes, what changed in this generation that allowed them to see what others couldn't? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The difference is not education, it is exposure. This generation did not grow up believing the speeches. They grew up watching the outcomes. They saw export numbers rise while electricity failed. They watched presidents promise growth while friends left the country. They noticed that every development decade ended with the same problems, only rebranded. They didn't inherit hope, they inherited patterns. They noticed that corruption wasn't random, it was organized, that poverty wasn't accidental, it was structured, that reform wasn't blocked, it was slowed into irrelevance. And then they noticed something more dangerous. Every time someone tried to change the structure, the language changed. Suddenly, it was about risk, stability, investor confidence, geopolitical balance. The same words appeared in different countries, in different crises, with the same timing. That's when the myth collapsed. If leaders were the problem, the system would have fixed itself by now. If corruption were the cause, new faces would have changed outcomes. But nothing changed, so they stopped blaming individuals. They started questioning the design. They understood that Africa wasn't failing at development. It was being kept in preparation, always building, never arriving, always exporting, never finishing. That realization spread faster than ideology ever could. Not through politics, through screenshots, trade data, leaked contracts, shipping manifests, and currency charts. They saw that their countries were productive, yet permanently indebted. Those resources were left faster than schools were built. That money returned more slowly than the interest accumulated. This wasn't a failure. It was a loop. So when Traore spoke Sankara's name, they didn't hear nostalgia. They heard a threat to that loop. They heard a leader acknowledging that the problem was not governance, it was routing. They didn't expect perfection. They expected an interruption. And that expectation is dangerous, because systems are built to absorb leadership changes, but not structural challenges. Which is why the response is already forming, quietly, in numbers, in reports, in currency flows, in security narratives. The generation understands something now that previous ones were never allowed to see. You don't need permission to redesign a system that never served you. But redesign provokes resistance, and resistance always arrives wearing the mask of necessity. So the next question is unavoidable. What happens when the system decides to push back? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. It never starts with confrontation. There is no announcement, no declaration, no visible enemy. The first sign is silence. Funding approvals take longer. Currency prices begin to wobble. Projects that were almost ready suddenly require more review. Security reports grow vague, then alarming. Nothing is directly blamed on leadership. Everything is blamed on conditions, market conditions, regional conditions, global conditions. But the timing is never random. Pressure is applied like weight on a lever, slowly, quietly, precisely. Not enough to break the system, only enough to bend it back into alignment. Because the goal is not to collapse. The goal is compliance. This is how structural resistance works. Not through overthrow, through fatigue. Foreign credit agencies adjust outlooks. Investors pause. Insurance premiums rise. Trade partners grow cautious. Inside the country, the invisible layer activates. Files stall. Audits become complex. Committees request revisions. Each delay adds cost, uncertainty, and stress. It looks like bureaucracy, It is counter-pressure. At the same time, the narrative shifts. News cycles focus on instability. Analysts question sustainability. Diplomats suggest moderation. The message is always the same. Slow down. Compromise. Be reasonable. Because once you compromise, the route reopens. This is why most revolutions fade. They are not crushed. They are negotiated into neutrality. And the system survives. But pressure works only when leaders stand alone. When citizens believe in personalities instead of processes. When support is emotional rather than informed. When people cheer but do not track. That is the opening. Because systems are patient. They wait for exhaustion. So the real danger is not external pressure. It is internal surrender disguised as pragmatism, which is why finishing the revolution cannot be symbolic. It must be locked into systems that outlast fear. And that requires something no leader can provide alone. It requires collective defense of the structure. Public audits, open data, regional trade coordination, digital tracking, institutional memory, not slogans, mechanisms. Because once the roots are rebuilt, they must be guarded by people who understand why they exist. Which leads to the final question. Who is ready to defend a redesign that will be tested at every turn? The truth is simple. No leader can finish this alone. Not because the task is impossible, but because the system that must be changed is older, wider, and more patient than any presidency. It does not panic. It does not rush. It waits for people to get tired, distracted, divided, or afraid. So if finishing what Sankara started is real, it cannot live in one office, one uniform, or one voice. It must live in public systems that cannot be quietly reversed. This is where the final shift must happen, from belief to ownership. Ownership means knowing where revenue comes from, where it is routed, where it settles, and who touches it along the way. It means demanding transparency not once, but permanently. It means tracking contracts, budgets, export data, and debt obligations with the same intensity people track football scores. Because systems survive when citizens treat them as invisible. They collapse when citizens treat them as the main story. This is the redesign, moving from personality politics to structural politics, from cheering to auditing, from defending leaders to defending processes. That is the only protection that lasts. The system will test every reform. It will look for cracks, it will exploit delays, it will reward those who try to reopen the old roots quietly. It will frame discipline as chaos and accountability as instability. So the redesign must be loud, clear, and irreversible. Digitized revenue, local pricing, regional trade corridors, independent auditing, open data. These are not technical upgrades, they are locks. Once in place, they prevent the pipeline from being quietly restored. But locks only work if people notice when they are tampered with, which is why the revolution is no longer about overthrowing a system. It is about guarding a new one. Every generation gets one real choice, not between leaders, but between structures, between repeating history or rewriting its architecture. The sentence is not a promise. It is a checkpoint. And now the final question remains. Will the people become the firewall that protects the future? Or will the old system find its way back in again? Let us know in the comments section. Why do you think Traore is trying to complete the unfinished mission? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.